Okay, we're going to start with the tricarboxylic acid cycle, the central engine of cellular respiration. Tricarboxylic acid cycle is also known as the Krebs cycle or the Krebs acid cycle. The Krebs cycle is also known as what? The tricarboxylic acid cycle. So what happens here? Okay, let's dive in to discuss. So we all know that pyruvate is gotten from glucose by process known as glycolysis, and glucose is a substrate of carbohydrates. Glucose is gotten from carbohydrate from the breakdown of carbohydrates. So carbohydrates yields glucose. Glucose now undergoes glycolysis to form acetyl-CoA in the presence of oxygen. The same thing happens to fats or triglycerides. Their end product is also glycerol and fat. These fats now yield acetyl-CoA. The same thing also happens to proteins. Proteins is breaking down into amino acid, which are monomers of proteins, which are linked by peptide bonds. So these catabolisms of proteins now yield to acetyl-CoA. So the byproduct of carbohydrates, fats and protein yields acetyl-CoA. This is the reason why carbohydrates can produce fats and carbohydrates can also form proteins, the non-essential proteins, not the essential proteins. And proteins can also form fats and also form carbohydrates, especially during the starvation time, when someone have not eaten for a very long time, whereby all the fats and carbohydrates have been completely used up. Our body start taking proteins. That is the time of death. So this acetyl-CoA will now enter into the matrix of the mitochondria. And remember, matrix means space. So when we talk about matrix of the mitochondria, we are trying to see the space of the mitochondria inside the intermembrane of the mitochondria. Remember that in the tricarboxylic acid cycle or in glycolysis, you'll be seeing in this tricarboxylic acid cycle and in pyruvate metabolism we have already done, and in glycolysis we have already also done. You'll be seeing that NAD positive will be converted to what? NADH. And in this tricarboxylic acid or the Krebs cycle, you'll be seeing FAD is converted to FADH. Why are we converting these things to this? Because it will enter into the electron transport chain to produce what? Energy. Don't worry, in our electron transport chain you will understand why we have been converting all these things to this format. You see how they produce energy. Now in the acetyl-CoA, and I want you to also let's assume something. We have done we have done cells. We have talked about the cells. Let's assume that you know the cell. But before that, let's continue before that region. So this tricarboxylic acid cycle, the acetyl-CoA enters into the mitochondria and joins the tricarboxylic acid cycle to use this NADH and FADH. This NADH and FADH will now enter the electron transport chain to produce what we call ATP. You understand this in our electron transport chain. But have something in mind. This NADH will come and deposit those electrons and hydrogen ion it have collected already from glycolysis and pyruvate metabolism. This NADH, they will come and deposit them, and when they deposit these electrons and hydrogen ion, they now return back to their original form, and the original form is what? NAD positive and what? FADH. So these electrons will now be trapped by the inner membrane, by the enzymes inside the inner membrane of the mitochondria. They will now yield these electrons will now increase their energy. This energy now keep on pumping out hydrogen ion from the cytosol of the matrix of the mitochondria to the intermembrane of the mitochondria. Then there's what's called the ATP synthase. The ATP synthase starts joining the ADP together with the phosphate to now form what? ATP. You will better understand this in the electron transport chain. Just make sure you wait or you go to my playlist and make sure, or in our future lectures I will teach you the electron transport chain. Make sure you watch the video. You understand what I just said perfectly well. What you have to just have in mind is this NADH and FADH are deposited in the membrane of this mitochondria. Then they will now use ATP. Recall that we say that we have prokaryotic cell and eukaryotic cells. So prokaryotic cells are cells without well-defined nucleus. They have nucleoid instead of nucleus. And in eukaryotic cell we have nucleus, and in the prokaryotic cell we don't have membrane bound organelles there. So most of the organelles there are not membrane bound, meaning that they don't have membrane covering the organelles there. But in the eukaryotic cells we have membrane covering the organelles. Look at what I mean. In the mitochondria we have membranes surrounding the mitochondria. In the endoplasmic reticulum we have membranes surrounding, and they are biphospholipid bilayer. They are phospholipid bilayer. Remember that membrane and phospholipid bilayer. This means that they have phosphate. They are made up of phosphate. They are made up of lipid. Which kind of lipid? Phospholipid. And why do we call them bilayer? Is for every membrane we have the inside membrane, we call it the inner membrane, and we have the outside membrane, we call it the outer membrane. And we now have a space. So this membrane, remember we call it what? A phospholipid bilayer. Phospholipid means it have a lipid, and which kind of lipid? Phosphate, and we call it a bilayer. Bilayer means it has two membranes, and we have the inner membrane and we have the outer membrane. So in the inner membrane of the mitochondria, that is where electron transport chain takes place. That is where energy are produced by enzymes that joins the inner membrane. You understand this better in the electron transport chain. Just have it in mind. In every membrane, or in eukaryotic organelles, they are bimembrane. They are phospholipid bilayer. This is what happens in the mitochondria. In the mitochondria, it is a phospholipid bilayer. And look at the inner membranes. Can you see them? All these things are the inner membranes. So what is occurring? And this is the outer membranes. So in these outer membranes, what else do you have there? We now have a space. That is the space of between the outer membrane and the inner membrane. So that is where hydrogen gradient is created, which will now yield ATP production. You understand this better in electron transport chain, as I have said previously. So